Rachel had never liked the dark. Even at 32 years old, she still kept a small lamp on in her bedroom at night. Her friends used to tease her about it, but she didn't care. There was something about complete darkness that made her chest tight and her heart race. She lived alone in a small apartment in Portland, spending most of her time working as a freelance photographer. Her days were filled with light, natural sunlight streaming through windows, the bright flash of her camera, the glow of her computer screen as she edited photos late into the night. Light made her feel safe. Light meant she could see what was coming. That November evening started like any other. Rachel sat at her desk, headphones on, completely absorbed in editing a wedding shoot from the weekend before. The bride's smile was radiant in the photos, and Rachel felt that familiar satisfaction that came from capturing a perfect moment. Outside her window, the sky had turned dark hours ago, but inside her apartment, everything was warm and bright. Then, without warning, everything went black. The hum of her computer died. The warm glow of her desk lamp vanished. Even the small nightlight in her hallway went out. Rachel's apartment was suddenly plunged into complete, total darkness. She yanked off her headphones, her breathing already getting faster. Through her window, she could see that the entire street was dark. The power was out everywhere. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. The screen lit up her face with a harsh blue glow. 11% battery, of course. She'd forgotten to charge it again. Rachel turned on the flashlight feature and slowly made her way to her kitchen drawer where she kept candles. She hated using candles. They created shadows that danced and moved. But she didn't have much choice. As she fumbled through the drawer, her hand closed around a lighter just as she heard it. A sound that made every muscle in her body freeze. A baby crying. It was faint, muffled by walls and distance, but unmistakable. A baby's desperate, frightened cry cutting through the silent darkness. Rachel stood perfectly still, holding her breath, wondering if she'd imagined it. But no, there it was again. Louder this time. More urgent. She moved to her window and looked out. The street below was empty and dark. No cars, no people, just shadows and the faint outline of buildings against the night sky. But the crying continued, and now she could tell it was coming from somewhere down the street, maybe a block away. Rachel's first instinct was to stay inside. Call someone. Let someone else handle it. Her phone was dying, and the dark street looked like something out of a nightmare. Every childhood fear she'd ever had seemed to whisper at her to lock her door and wait for the power to come back on. But the baby kept crying. She thought about her neighbors. Old Mr. Peterson was nearly deaf, he wouldn't hear it. The college students next door had their music so loud most nights they probably couldn't hear anything. What if no one else could hear this baby? What if she was the only one? Rachel grabbed her jacket with trembling hands. She told herself she would just step outside, see if she could figure out where the sound was coming from and call for help. That was all. Just a few minutes. Her phone battery indicator glowed red now, 9%. She had to be quick. The moment she stepped into the hallway, the darkness seemed to press against her from all sides. The emergency lights in the stairwell weren't working. She had to feel her way down the stairs, one hand on the wall, her phone's flashlight beam bouncing with each step. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Outside was worse. Without streetlights, without porch lights, without even the glow of traffic lights in the distance, the world had become a black void. Rachel could barely see 5 feet in front of her. The November wind cut through her jacket, making her shiver. She wanted to turn around, go back inside, convince herself that someone else would help. Then she heard the crying again, weaker now, more desperate. And underneath it, she thought she heard something else. A woman's voice calling out, but too faint to make out the words. Rachel started walking toward the sound. Her phone's flashlight created a small circle of light that moved with her, illuminating cracked sidewalk and fallen leaves. Everything beyond that circle was pure darkness. She kept the phone low, trying to conserve battery, her eyes straining to adjust to the night. The crying led her down her street and around the corner. This road was on a slight hill, and she remembered it was always a tricky intersection, especially at night. Cars came around that bend too fast sometimes. She'd seen a few close calls. As she got closer, her flashlight beam caught something that made her stop cold. Broken glass scattered across the pavement, glittering in the light like shattered stars. She raised the beam and gasped. A car had crashed. It was overturned on its side against a telephone pole, the front end crumpled like paper. The windows were shattered, and in the dim light she could see the driver slumped over the deflated airbag, not moving. And from the back seat she could hear it clearly now, the baby, screaming with everything in its little lungs. Rachel ran forward, nearly slipping on the broken glass. She reached the car and pressed her face against the broken window. Her phone's light illuminated the interior, and her heart nearly stopped. A baby, maybe 6 or 7 months old, was strapped into a car seat in the back. The child's face was red from crying, little fists waving in the air. The driver, a young woman, maybe late 20s, was unconscious in the front seat, blood trickling down her forehead. "Hello? Can you hear me?" Rachel called out to the driver, but there was no response. She pulled out her phone to call 911, but her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. 7% battery now, she managed to dial, and a dispatcher answered immediately. "There's been an accident," Rachel said, her voice coming out high and thin. "A car crashed at the intersection of Maple and 4th. There's a woman unconscious and a baby trapped inside. Please hurry." The dispatcher asked her to stay on the line, started asking questions about injuries and exact location, but Rachel's attention was pulled away by something else, a smell, sharp and chemical. She'd photographed enough cars for an auto magazine early in her career to recognize it immediately. Gasoline. The car was leaking fuel. "I have to go," she told the dispatcher. "I have to get them out." "Ma'am, wait for emergency services." Rachel hung up. 4% battery. She turned off the phone to save what little power remained and shoved it in her pocket. In the sudden darkness, her eyes needed a moment to adjust. The crying baby sounded weaker now, more of a whimper than a scream. That scared her more than the loud crying had. She tried the back door of the car, but it was jammed shut. The frame had bent in the crash, and no matter how hard she pulled, it wouldn't budge. She tried the other side, but that door was crushed against the ground. Panic started to claw at her throat. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger. Rachel ran to the driver's side. The door was smashed in, but there was a gap between the door and the frame. She grabbed the edge and pulled with every ounce of strength she had. The metal groaned but didn't move. She repositioned her grip and pulled again, feeling something pop in her shoulder. Still nothing. Tears of frustration stung her eyes. She was going to fail. The baby was going to die because she wasn't strong enough, and she was standing here alone in the dark like she'd always feared. "Come on," she whispered to herself. Or maybe to the universe. "Please, come on." She took a deep breath, planted her feet, and pulled one more time. She screamed with the effort, pouring everything she had into it. The door shifted an inch, then 2 inches. Then suddenly it gave way with a horrible screeching sound that echoed through the silent street. The driver was still unconscious, but breathing. Rachel carefully leaned past her, reaching for the baby in the back seat. Her fingers fumbled with the car seat buckle in the darkness. The baby had stopped crying now, which terrified her even more than the screaming had. She got one strap loose, then another, her hands working mostly by touch. Finally, she lifted the car seat free. The baby was so light, lighter than she'd expected. She backed out of the car carefully, cradling the seat against her chest. In the faint moonlight that had begun to peek through the clouds, she could see the baby's face. The little one was awake, looking up at her with wide, confused eyes. "It's okay," Rachel whispered. "I've got you. You're safe now." She had just taken 3 steps away from the car when she heard footsteps running toward her. She turned, expecting to see emergency vehicles, but instead there was a figure emerging from the darkness. A man moving fast, heading straight for the crashed car. "The driver," Rachel called out. "She's still inside." The man didn't answer. He ran to the car and started pulling at the driver's door with the same desperate strength Rachel had used moments before. Even in the darkness, she could see he was tall and strong, and he managed to wrench the door open wider. He reached in and began unbuckling the unconscious woman's seatbelt. Rachel wanted to help, but she was holding the baby, and suddenly her legs felt weak. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was starting to fade, leaving her shaky and cold. She watched as the man carefully pulled the driver from the car and lifted her in his arms like she weighed nothing. "Get back," he said, his voice urgent but calm. "Both of you, get further away." Rachel didn't need to be told twice. She moved quickly up the street, putting distance between herself and the crashed car. The man carried the woman and laid her gently on the sidewalk, then jogged to catch up with Rachel. That's when they heard it. The wail of sirens in the distance growing louder. Red and blue lights began to flash at the far end of the street. Help was coming. Rachel stood on the sidewalk, The car seat still clutched against her chest, watching the emergency lights get closer. The baby had started crying again, but it was a softer sound now, more tired than terrified. She bounced the car seat gently, the way she'd seen mothers do in parks, hoping it might soothe the little one. The man who'd helped pull the driver out stood a few feet away, his hands on his knees catching his breath. In the flashing red and blue lights that were getting closer, Rachel could see him more clearly. He looked like he was in his early 30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Thank you," she said, her voice still shaky. "I couldn't have gotten her out alone." He straightened up and looked at her, and even in the dim light she could see kindness in his eyes. "You did the hard part," he said. "You heard the baby. You came when everyone else stayed inside." Before Rachel could respond, the first fire truck rounded the corner, followed by an ambulance and 2 police cars. The street that had been so dark and empty suddenly blazed with light and activity. Firefighters jumped out, paramedics grabbed their gear, and everyone moved with practiced efficiency. A female paramedic rushed over to Rachel. "Are you hurt? Were you in the accident?" "No, I heard the baby crying and came to help." Rachel looked down at the car seat. "I think she's okay, but please check her." The paramedic gently took the car seat from Rachel's arms, and suddenly, Rachel's hands felt empty and strange. She watched as the medical team examined the baby, shining lights in her eyes, checking her over carefully. Another team of paramedics was working on the unconscious driver, loading her onto a stretcher. A police officer approached Rachel with a notepad. "Can you tell me what happened?" Rachel explained everything. The power outage, hearing the crying, finding the crashed car. As she talked, she realized her whole body was trembling. The officer noticed too. "You should sit down," he said, not unkindly. "You've had quite a shock." Rachel looked around for the man who'd helped her, wanting to make sure the police got his statement too, but he wasn't there. She scanned the crowd of emergency workers, the gathered neighbors who'd started emerging from their houses, but she couldn't see him anywhere. "The man who helped me," she said to the officer. "Did you see where he went?" The officer looked confused. "What man?" "There was a man here. He pulled the driver out of the car. He was right here just a minute ago." The officer glanced at his partner, who shrugged. "We didn't see anyone else when we pulled up. Just you and the victims." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold November wind. That didn't make sense. He'd been right there. She'd talked to him. He'd told her she did the hard part. How could he just vanish? "Miss, are you sure you're not hurt?" the officer asked, studying her face with concern. "Sometimes shock can—" "I'm fine," Rachel said quickly. He must have just left. Maybe he didn't want to get involved with the police report. But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. Something felt wrong about the whole thing. The paramedic came back over. "The baby's fine," she said with a smile. "A few bruises, scared and cold, but nothing serious. She's incredibly lucky you hurt her." Rachel felt relief wash over her so powerfully that her knees almost buckled. "And the mother?" "She's alive. Concussion, some cuts, possible broken ribs. But she'll make it thanks to you both getting her out before—" The paramedic paused. "The car could have caught fire. You saved 2 lives tonight." Rachel didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted and confused, and like her legs might give out at any moment. One of the firefighters brought her a blanket, and she wrapped it around her shoulders gratefully. The power came back on about 20 minutes later. Suddenly, the street was flooded with normal light. Porch lights, street lights, the glow of houses. Everything looked so ordinary, so everyday. It was hard to believe that just a short while ago everything had been darkness and terror. The police took her full statement and her contact information. They told her the driver's name was Melissa Torres, and she'd been on her way home from her mother's house when she swerved to avoid an animal in the road. The baby was her daughter, Daniela. Both were being taken to Portland General Hospital. By the time Rachel was allowed to go home, it was past midnight. She walked back to her apartment in a daze, still wrapped in the firefighter's blanket. When she got to her door, her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the lock. Inside, everything looked exactly as she'd left it. Her computer screen was dark, but still on her desk. The candles and lighter sat on the counter where she'd left them. It felt like she'd been gone for hours, but her whole world had changed in less than an hour. Rachel didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crashed car, smelled the gasoline, heard the baby's cries. and she kept thinking about the man who'd helped her. Where had he gone? Why had he disappeared? The more she thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The next morning, Rachel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Apparently, someone had posted about the rescue on a neighborhood Facebook group, and the local news had picked up the story. By noon, a reporter was knocking on her door asking for an interview. "I don't want to talk about it," Rachel said through the door. "I just did what anyone would do." But the reporter was persistent. "People are calling you a hero. Don't you want to share your story?" "No, please just leave me alone." She heard the reporter finally walk away, but she knew it wouldn't end there. Sure enough, that evening she saw her name on the local news. "Mystery woman saves baby in blackout." They didn't have her picture, thankfully, but neighbors had given descriptions. It was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. Rachel stayed inside for the next few days, ignoring calls and messages. She tried to return to her normal routine, editing photos, answering client emails, but she couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to that night, to the darkness, to the crying baby, to the mysterious man who'd vanished. On the fourth day after the accident, Rachel finally worked up the courage to do something she'd been avoiding. She went through her camera. She always wore it around her neck, even at home, a habit from her photography days. She hadn't even realized she'd been wearing it that night until she got home and saw the strap still around her neck. Her hands trembled as she pulled up the photos. Most were from the wedding she'd been editing. But then she found them. In the chaos of that night, apparently, her finger had hit the shutter button. The photos were dark and blurry, taken without her even realizing it. Most were useless, just smears of darkness and maybe a hint of the crashed car. But one photo made her breath catch in her throat. It was taken right after the emergency vehicles had arrived. The flash from their lights had illuminated the scene for just a moment, and her camera had captured it. There, clear as day, was the man who'd helped her. He was turned slightly away from the camera, but she could see his profile. And something about his face made her heart start racing. She'd seen that face before. She knew she had. But where? Rachel spent the next hour going through every photo on her computer, searching for that familiar face. Wedding photos, birthday parties, corporate events, street photography, thousands and thousands of images. Nothing. Then, almost by accident, she found it. A photo she'd taken 6 months ago at a memorial service. She'd been hired to photograph the event by the family. It was a sad occasion. A young man who died in a hiking accident. The family had wanted pictures of everyone who came to pay respects. There, in the back of one photo, was the man from that night. He was standing with a woman who looked devastated, his hand on her shoulder in comfort. Rachel checked the file name. The memorial service had been for someone named David Torres, the same last name as the woman from the crash. Melissa Torres. Rachel's mind raced. Could it be a relative? A brother, maybe? But that didn't make sense. If he was part of the family, why would he run away? Why wouldn't he go to the hospital with his sister? Unless... Rachel pulled up the memorial service photos again and looked more carefully. She found the program from the service that she'd photographed. David Torres, beloved son and brother. And there was a photo of him printed on the program. It was him. The man who'd helped her that night was David Torres. But David Torres had died 6 months ago. Rachel stared at the screen, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. It had to be someone else. A cousin who looked similar, a friend. Anything but what the evidence was suggesting. She grabbed her phone and, before she could talk herself out of it, searched for Melissa Torres on social media. It took a few minutes, but she found her. The profile picture showed a young woman with kind eyes holding a baby. It was definitely the woman from the crash. Rachel scrolled through Melissa's posts. Most were about baby Daniela. First smiles, first foods, all the normal things new mothers posted. But then she found something that made her blood run cold. A post from 6 months ago. A memorial post for David Torres. "Missing my big brother every day," it read. "Wish you could have met Daniela. She has your eyes." The photos showed David at various ages, and every single one confirmed what Rachel already knew. The man who'd helped her save Melissa and her baby was David Torres, Melissa's brother, who had been dead for 6 months. Rachel slammed her laptop shut and stood up so fast her chair fell over. This was crazy. She was tired, stressed, probably still in shock from the whole experience. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe David had a twin. Maybe she'd misread the dates on the memorial service. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her because of the trauma and the darkness and the fear. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, she knew what she'd seen. She knew who'd helped her that night. And she had no idea what to do about it. Over the next week, Rachel found herself obsessed with the mystery. She went back to the intersection where the crash had happened, taking photos in the daylight. She interviewed neighbors asking if anyone had seen the man. No one had. She was the only one who'd seen him. Finally, she made a decision. She had to talk to Melissa. She had to know if she was crazy, or if something impossible had actually happened that night. Finding Melissa's hospital room number wasn't hard. Rachel still had contacts from when she'd done medical photography. She learned that Melissa had been released, but that she and Daniela were staying with her mother while she recovered. Rachel sent a message through Facebook. Simple and direct. "Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm the one who pulled Daniela from the car. I'd really like to meet you, if you're feeling up to it." The response came within an hour. "Please, yes. I've been wanting to thank you. Can you come for coffee tomorrow?" Rachel arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. She changed her outfit 3 times that morning, which was ridiculous because this wasn't a job interview or a date. She was just meeting the woman whose life she'd saved. The woman whose dead brother had somehow helped her save. She ordered a tea she didn't really want and sat at a corner table where she could watch the door. Her hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. She'd brought a folder with her. Inside were the photos from that night. She wasn't sure if she'd show them to Melissa or not. What would she even say? "Hey, I think your dead brother's ghost helped me rescue you?" That sounded insane. The door opened and Rachel's breath caught. Melissa walked in, pushing a stroller, her mother beside her for support. She still had bruises on her face fading to yellow and green, and she moved carefully like someone whose ribs were still healing. But her smile was warm and genuine when she spotted Rachel. "You must be Rachel," Melissa said, making her way over. "I'd recognize you anywhere from the news coverage, even though they didn't show your face." Rachel stood up awkwardly, not sure whether to shake hands or hug or what. Melissa made the decision for her, wrapping Rachel in a gentle but heartfelt embrace. "Thank you," Melissa whispered. "Thank you for saving my baby." "Thank you for saving me." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Melissa's mother said firmly. She was an older woman with silver hair and Melissa's same kind eyes. "Most people would have stayed inside. You risked your life in that darkness. Don't minimize that." They sat down, and Rachel found herself looking into the stroller at baby Daniela. The little girl was awake, making cooing sounds and waving her tiny fists. She looked perfect and healthy with no sign of the trauma she'd been through. "Can I hold her?" Rachel asked, surprising herself. "Please," Melissa said, carefully lifting Daniela and passing her over. The baby settled into Rachel's arms like she belonged there. She looked up at Rachel with those big, curious eyes, and Rachel felt something shift in her chest. This tiny person was alive because she'd been brave enough to walk into the darkness. "She likes you," Melissa's mother observed. "She's usually fussy with strangers." They ordered coffee and pastries, though Rachel still felt too nervous to eat much. Melissa wanted to hear everything about that night, every detail, so Rachel told her, leaving out only the part about the mysterious man. She described hearing the crying, finding the car, pulling Daniela free. Melissa listened with tears streaming down her face. "I don't remember much," Melissa admitted. "I remember seeing something in the road. I think it was a deer. I swerved and then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital and they told me someone had saved us. But no one could tell me who. You refused all the interview requests and the police wouldn't give out your information." "I don't like attention," Rachel said simply. "I just wanted to make sure you were both okay." "We're okay because of you," Melissa said. "The doctors said if we'd been in that car much longer with the fuel leak." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Rachel's hand tightened on the folder. This was her opening. She could tell Melissa about the man now. But looking at this young mother, still bruised and healing, Rachel lost her nerve. What good would it do? What if it upset her? Or worse, what if Melissa thought Rachel was crazy? "Tell me about yourself," Rachel said instead, changing the subject. "Are you from Portland?" Melissa seemed grateful for the topic shift. She explained that she'd moved to Portland about 8 months ago, shortly after Daniela was born. She'd left an abusive relationship in California and come here to start fresh. Her mother had moved up from Sacramento to help her. It's been hard, Melissa admitted. Being a single mom, starting over in a new city where I don't know anyone. Some days I feel so alone. She paused, looking embarrassed. Sorry, that's probably too much information for a first meeting. No, Rachel said quickly. I understand. I moved here 5 years ago and still don't really have close friends. It's hard to connect with people sometimes. And just like that, the conversation became easier. They talked about life in Portland, about being lonely in a city full of people, about the challenges of starting over. Melissa told funny stories about Daniela's sleep schedule, or lack thereof. And Rachel found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks. Melissa's mother excused herself to make a phone call, leaving the two younger women alone. Daniela had fallen asleep in Rachel's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. Can I ask you something? Melissa said quietly. In the news reports, they said you were afraid of the dark, that you'd been afraid your whole life, but you went out anyway. Is that true? Rachel nodded, looking down at the sleeping baby. Terrified, actually. I can't even sleep without a light on. That night was the worst thing I could imagine, being out there in complete darkness. But I heard Daniela crying and I couldn't stay inside. I couldn't let fear stop me. That's real courage, Melissa said, being afraid and doing it anyway. They exchanged phone numbers before leaving, promising to stay in touch. As Rachel walked back to her apartment, Daniela's peaceful face still fresh in her mind, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A connection. A beginning of what might actually become a friendship. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and Melissa texted regularly. At first, it was just Melissa sending pictures of Daniela or updates on her recovery. But gradually, their conversations deepened. They started meeting for coffee once a week, then twice a week. Rachel would bring her camera and take photos of Daniela, professional quality shots that Melissa treasured. Melissa was trying to start a small business making jewelry, working from home so she could be with Daniela. But she didn't have good photos of her pieces, and her sales were struggling. Rachel offered to help. I can't pay you much, Melissa said apologetically. I don't want payment, Rachel replied. You're my friend. Let me do this. Rachel spent a weekend photographing Melissa's jewelry, delicate necklaces and earrings that Melissa made by hand. The photos turned out beautifully, and when Melissa posted them on her website, her sales tripled within a month. As their friendship grew, Rachel found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told Melissa about her struggles with anxiety, about how she'd isolated herself for years because connecting with people felt too hard, too risky. Melissa shared her own story, the abusive relationship, the fear, the courage it took to leave with a newborn baby. Sometimes I still can't believe I actually did it, Melissa confided one afternoon. They were at Melissa's mother's house where Melissa was still staying. Daniela was having tummy time on a blanket, and Rachel was capturing photos of her. There were so many times I almost went back. He kept calling, saying he'd changed. And I was so tired and scared and alone. What made you stay away? Rachel asked. Melissa was quiet for a moment. This is going to sound crazy, but I kept having these dreams about my brother. David died about 6 months before I left. We'd been fighting. He'd tried to warn me about my ex, told me to leave, and I pushed him away. We weren't speaking when he died. Her voice broke. I never got to tell him he was right. That I was sorry. Rachel's heart started pounding. This was it. This was her chance to tell Melissa about that night. But something held her back. Let Melissa finish, she thought. In my dreams, David kept telling me to be strong, to think of the baby, to get out and start over. It sounds silly, but those dreams helped me find the courage to leave. Melissa wiped her eyes. I wish he could have met Daniela. She has his eyes, you know. Rachel thought about the photo on her laptop. The man at the crash site, David Torres. She'd looked at that photo 100 times, memorized every detail of his face. And Melissa was right. Daniela had the same eyes. I'm sure he knows about her, Rachel said softly. I'm sure he's proud of you. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Melissa's dreams, about David trying to guide his sister even after death. Was that what had happened at the crash site? Had David somehow been there, helping Rachel save the sister he couldn't protect in life? The next morning, Rachel made a decision. She was going to tell Melissa everything. She printed out the photo from that night, the one that showed David clearly. She also printed photos from the memorial service to prove it was the same man. But when she arrived at Melissa's for their usual coffee date, she found her friend in tears. "What's wrong?" Rachel asked, immediately concerned. "It's stupid," Melissa said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just being emotional. It's David's birthday today. He would have been 34. Rachel sat down beside her friend, the folder of photos suddenly feeling heavy in her hands. Was this the right time? Or the worst possible time? "I actually wanted to talk to you about David," Rachel said carefully. Melissa looked up, confused. "About David? Why?" Rachel opened the folder and pulled out the photo from the crash site. Her hands were shaking. "This photo was taken that night. The night of your accident. I didn't even realize I'd taken it until days later." Melissa took the photo, studying it in the light from the window. Rachel watched her face closely, saw the exact moment recognition hit. Melissa's eyes went wide, her mouth opened slightly, and the photo began to tremble in her hands. That's David," she whispered. "But that's impossible. David died last year." "I know," Rachel said quietly. "I went to his memorial service. I photographed it, actually. Your family hired me. I didn't make the connection until I saw the photos." Melissa looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. Are you telling me that my brother was there that night? That he helped you save us?" "I don't know what I'm saying," Rachel admitted. "I just know that a man helped me pull you out of the car. He was solid and real. I talked to him. And then when the police arrived, he was gone. Vanished. And when I looked at the photos, I realized it was David." Melissa stared at the photo for a long time, her fingers tracing the outline of her brother's face. "He came back," she finally said. "He came back to protect me even though I didn't deserve it. Even though I pushed him away." "You deserve it," Rachel said firmly. "And he knew that. He loved you." They sat together in silence, both looking at the impossible photo. Finally, Melissa spoke again. "Can I keep this?" "Of course," Rachel said. "I made you a copy." Melissa held the photo to her chest, new tears falling. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were something else. Relief, maybe. Or peace. "Thank you," she said to Rachel. "Thank you for showing me this. Thank you for everything." As Rachel drove home that afternoon, she felt like something had shifted. The mystery that had been haunting her for weeks felt less scary now. Less about her being crazy and more about something beautiful. A brother's love reaching beyond death to protect his sister one more time. That night, for the first time since she was a child, Rachel slept with the lights off. The weeks following that conversation changed something fundamental in both women. Melissa framed the photo of her brother and kept it on her nightstand, next to a picture of Daniela. She said it brought her comfort, knowing that David had been there when she needed him most. For Rachel, something even stranger was happening. Her lifelong fear of darkness was fading, not disappearing entirely. She still felt a flutter of anxiety when the lights went out, but the paralyzing terror that had controlled her for 32 years was loosening its grip. She'd faced the worst of her fears that night and survived. More than survived. She'd saved 2 lives. Their friendship deepened into something that felt like family. Rachel became Daniela's unofficial aunt, always there for doctor's appointments, or sleepless nights when Melissa needed an extra pair of hands. Melissa helped Rachel start opening up to the world again, encouraging her to take on more interesting photography projects instead of hiding behind her computer. One evening, about 2 months after the accident, Rachel was having dinner at Melissa's mother's house. They'd become a regular presence in each other's lives, and Melissa's mother, Carmen, treated Rachel like a second daughter. "I've been thinking about something," Melissa said, bouncing Daniela on her knee. "That intersection where the accident happened. It's still so dark at night. What if someone else gets hurt there?" Rachel had been thinking the same thing. She'd driven past that intersection dozens of times since the accident, always feeling a chill when she saw the spot where the car had crashed. "Have there been other accidents there?" "I looked it up," Carmen said, joining the conversation from the kitchen. There have been 6 serious accidents at that corner in the past 3 years. One person died. The residents have been asking the city for better lighting for years, but nothing's been done. Rachel felt something stir in her chest, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. What if we did something about it? Melissa looked at her with surprise. Like what? I don't know yet. But there has to be something. We could start a petition. Maybe go to city council meetings. You hate public speaking, Melissa reminded her. You wouldn't even do a news interview after saving my life. I know, Rachel said. But this feels different. This feels important. And it was different. For the first time in her life, Rachel felt like she had something worth fighting for. She wasn't just hiding in her apartment anymore, afraid of the world. She had friends. She had purpose. She had a reason to be brave. The next week, Rachel started researching. She found reports of all the accidents at that intersection. She took photos of the area from every angle, documenting how dark and dangerous it was. She wrote up a proposal for new street lighting and submitted it to the city's transportation department. Then came the hard part, the city council meeting. Rachel had never spoken at a public meeting before. The idea of standing up in front of strangers and speaking into a microphone made her hands shake and her stomach churn. But Melissa and Carmen came with her for support, with Daniela in her stroller. When Rachel's name was called, she walked to the podium on legs that felt like jelly. She looked out at the council members, at the few dozen people scattered in the CU audience, and felt her prepared speech evaporate from her mind. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. She glanced back and saw Melissa standing right behind her, giving her an encouraging nod. And somehow, that was enough. My name is Rachel Chen, she began, her voice shaky but growing stronger. 2 months ago, I pulled a baby from a crashed car at the intersection of Maple and 4th. The mother and child survived, but they almost didn't. And the reason they crashed in the first place was because that intersection is so dark that the mother couldn't see the road properly. She told the story, not just of Melissa's crash, but of all the accidents that had happened there. She showed her photos, displayed the data she'd collected, and she talked about how darkness could kill but light could save lives. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then someone in the audience started clapping. Then another person. Soon the whole room was applauding. One of the council members, a woman named Rita Chen, leaned forward. Ms. Chen, are you by any chance related to my family? We don't have many Chens in Portland politics. Rachel smiled nervously. I don't think so. My family is from California. Well, regardless of relation, you've made a compelling case, Rita said. I'll make sure this gets added to our transportation safety review. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. As Rachel walked out of the city hall with Melissa and Carmen, she felt 10 feet tall. You were amazing, Melissa said, hugging her tight. I'm so proud of you. Over the next few months, Rachel threw herself into the campaign for better lighting. She wrote letters to local newspapers. She organized a neighborhood petition that got over 500 signatures. She even agreed to do a television interview, something the old Rachel would never have dreamed of doing. During that interview, the reporter asked her what had changed, what made her willing to step into the spotlight after spending years avoiding attention. Rachel thought about it carefully before answering. I used to think that staying small and quiet and invisible would keep me safe, she said. But that night in the darkness taught me that safety isn't the most important thing. Connection is. Purpose is. Being there for people who need you, that's what matters. The story went viral. Local news picked it up, then regional news. Suddenly, Rachel wasn't just the mystery woman who'd saved a baby. She was the woman fighting to make her community safer. And people responded. We've come so far, Melissa corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You know that, right? It was true in a way, but it was also true that Rachel couldn't have become who she was without Melissa either. They'd saved each other, really. That night in the darkness had been just the beginning. There's something else, Melissa continued, her voice becoming softer. The house has a small guest room. I was thinking maybe you'd want to use it as a studio sometimes, for when you need space to edit or store equipment. I know your apartment is getting cramped. Rachel understood what Melissa was really offering, not just a studio space, but a deeper connection, A place in each other's lives that was permanent, official, unshakable. I'd love that, Rachel said. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Daniela play. Then Rachel noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Daniela had found another little girl to play with, and they were holding hands, spinning in circles. The other girl's father sat nearby, watching with a gentle smile. But it was the father who caught Rachel's attention. There was something familiar about him. The way he held himself, the kindness in his eyes. For a moment, just a flash, he looked like someone else, someone impossible. Rachel blinked and the resemblance was gone. Just a random dad at a park, nothing more. But she felt a warmth spread through her chest anyway. A sense of being watched over, protected, guided. Do you still dream about him? Rachel asked quietly. About David? Melissa nodded. Sometimes. Less often now, but yes. They're good dreams. He's always telling me he's proud of me, that he loves Daniela, that he's happy I found you. She glanced at Rachel. Do you think that's really him? Or just my subconscious trying to give me closure? Rachel thought about the photo on her laptop, the one she'd looked at 1,000 times. The impossible image of a dead man helping save his sister. She thought about all the small miracles that had happened since that night. The timing, the connections, the way everything had fallen into place like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. I think it doesn't matter, she finally said. Whether it's really him or just your heart trying to heal, the message is the same. He loved you. He wanted you to be happy and safe. And you are. We are, Melissa agreed, squeezing Rachel's hand. That evening, Rachel returned to her apartment alone. She'd been invited to stay for dinner, but she had work to finish, editing photos for her next community safety project. But the apartment didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a space she occupied, not a place where she hid. She made herself tea and settled at her computer, pulling up the latest batch of photos. But first, as she did every few weeks, she opened the folder containing the images from that November night 3 years ago. There was the photo of David, clear as day, helping at the crash site. Rachel had shown it to a few people over the years, always getting the same reaction. Shock, confusion, and unwillingness to believe what they were seeing. Most people came up with explanations. It must have been someone who looked like him. The date on the camera must have been wrong. Stress and darkness played tricks on the mind. But Rachel knew the truth. She'd been there. She'd felt his hands helping lift the car seat. She'd heard his voice telling her to get back, to stay safe. Whatever had happened that night, however impossible it seemed, it had been real. She thought about everything that night had set in motion. Not just the physical rescue, but all the changes that followed. Her friendship with Melissa, becoming Daniela's godmother, fighting for the streetlights, finding her purpose, overcoming her fear of the dark. It was like dominoes falling, each event triggering the next, creating a cascade of transformation. And it all started with one choice, the choice to walk into the darkness despite her fear. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. It was a photo of Daniela in her pajamas, holding a stuffed bear that Rachel had given her for her first birthday. The message read, she wanted to say goodnight to Auntie Rachel. Rachel smiled and sent back a heart emoji and a goodnight message. Then she returned to her work but found herself distracted by memories. She remembered the woman she'd been 3 years ago. So afraid, so isolated, so convinced that the world was dangerous and people couldn't be trusted. That woman had been living in her own kind of darkness, not just afraid of the physical absence of light, but of connection, vulnerability, love. That night in the blackout had forced her into the literal darkness she'd always feared. But in doing so, it had led her out of the metaphorical darkness she'd been living in for years. Rachel stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city lights of Portland. Somewhere out there in a hospital or a home or walking down a street, there were other people living in their own darkness. People who were afraid, alone, convinced they couldn't change. People who needed someone to show them that courage was possible, that connection was worth the risk, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. She thought about David Torres, about the mysterious way he'd appeared that night. Whether he'd been a ghost, an angel, a hallucination, or something else entirely, his presence had changed everything. He'd given his sister a second chance at life, and in doing so, he'd given Rachel a second chance too. "Thank you," Rachel whispered to the night, just as she had so many times before. Thank you for showing me the light." 6 months later, Rachel stood in Melissa's new house helping to hang curtains in Daniela's bedroom. The little girl was directing them with all the authority of a 4-year-old interior designer. "No, Auntie Rachel, the princess curtains go on that window," Daniela insisted, pointing imperiously. "Yes, ma'am," Rachel said with a laugh, switching the curtains to the correct window. The house was small but perfect. Melissa had decorated it with photos, pictures of Daniela at every age, photos of the three of them together, and prominently displayed in the living room, the photo of David that Rachel had given her 3 years ago. Carmen had helped with the down payment, insisting that it was worth it to see her daughter and granddaughter settled and safe. The jewelry business was doing well enough that Melissa could afford the mortgage, with some left over for savings. That night, after Daniela was asleep and the last boxes were unpacked, Melissa opened a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses. They sat on the back porch, looking at the small yard that would soon be filled with Daniela's toys and laughter. "I never thought I'd have this," Melissa said quietly. "A house, a business, safety. 3 years ago I was running from my ex with a baby and no plan. I didn't think I'd make it." "But you did," Rachel said. "You're stronger than you know." "We did," Melissa corrected. "You've been there for every step. You're not just Daniela's godmother. You're my sister, the family I chose." Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You're my family too. You both are." They clinked glasses, a toast to survival, to friendship, to the family they'd built from the ashes of tragedy. Later that night, after Rachel had driven home and was getting ready for bed, she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She turned off all the lights in her apartment. Every single one. The living room lamp, the bathroom nightlight, the small lamp she usually kept on in her bedroom. The apartment fell into darkness. Not the complete blackness of a power outage, but the normal darkness of night, with just a bit of light filtering in from the street. Rachel lay in bed, her heart beating a little faster, but not with fear. With triumph. She'd faced the darkness and survived. More than survived, she'd found light on the other side. The light of love, of friendship, of purpose. She thought about Daniela, sleeping safely in her new house. About Melissa, building a life of dignity and independence. About all the people who'd been protected by the improved lighting around the city. About the women working in Melissa's jewelry workshop, finding their own paths to healing. One moment of courage in the darkness had created ripples that spread far beyond that single night. Rachel had saved 2 lives at that intersection, but in a way, those 2 lives had saved her right back. As sleep began to claim her, Rachel smiled in the darkness. She was no longer afraid. The dark was just the dark, a natural part of life, the contrast that made light possible, the canvas on which stars could shine. And she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that even in our darkest moments, even when we can't see the path ahead, even when we're terrified and alone, we have the power to be the light for someone else. And in doing so, we illuminate our own way forward. The woman who'd saved a baby in the dark had discovered that destiny wasn't waiting with just any light. It was waiting with the brightest light of all, the light of unconditional love, unbreakable bonds, and the profound understanding that we're never truly alone. We carry light within us. And sometimes all it takes is one brave step into the darkness to set that light free.